Some dare call it conspiracy.
Welcome to the Some Dare Call It Conspiracy podcast, hosted by Brent Lee and Neil Sanders. After nearly 20 years exploring the world of conspiracy culture, we are taking our guests and listeners on a guided tour of the rabbit hole. Our mission? To discover where the truth lies.
So Garth comes back and says, this connection, secret societies, in that it infiltrates, as you said, the music industry. It infiltrates Hollywood and the film industry as well. Do you think it's the same group of people that are kind of, infiltrating music, Hollywood, art, whatever, or whether there's almost specific groups that attach themselves to different industries?
You're sounding a bit like his dad right now.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. And also, it's like we haven't established that there's we haven't established that there's one in the music industry or Hollywood, and we just but we're assuming that. Do you think they're the same people? Do you think they have affiliations? Like, are they loosely connected? Is it like Blood and Crip sets where essentially all you have to do is put on a rag and say, it's me? Do you need to get jumped in? If you flash if you wave your flag and rep your set in a certain city, are those Bloods going to represent and recognize that? Who knows?
I don't know. It just sounds like he's referring to Jewish people.
Well, yeah, I mean, fuck, I've not even spotted that, actually. Yeah, but now that you say it, yeah.
That's what I meant.
Well, Kanko responds, well, it's a network. It's a vast network. It's a vast criminal network. And there are different cults and different groups of people and different secret societies and different fraternities all across the world. And they've all got each other's numbers in a way and that's how networks work. And they do favors for each other. Yeah, she's talking about Jews. Yep.
No, but this is exactly what I thought when I was a conspiracist. It's exactly what I thought. It's why I always tried to explain that I believed in a network of secret societies and cults that all worked together. Basically, they were all different bricks in that pyramid.
Yeah, but sort of all under the same sort of. They're all going in the same direction. There was a Stanley Monteith one as well that said something similar, that basically this is why people in the conspiracy world get confused, because some people will say it's the Freemasons, some people will say it's the Brotherhood of Darkness, some people say it's the Illuminati, some people will say it's the Satanists, and it's it's all of those people and none of those people. Actually the latter part of that is the most true, but let's not.
Well, I'll give you my way that I was able to just move that goalpost. It was just anything that's against God. So if it doesn't bring glory or light to God, that's what I felt at the time, then that was satanic. That was all under the umbrella of Satanism, Luciferianism, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Anything that takes away the glory from God and diverts it somewhere else, then it's all part of that. So that's the way I was able to wrap it up for myself, from my own beliefs back in the day.
There's different ways to attack God, but we're all attacking him in sort of our own ways and stuff like that. Some of us would be overtly satanic. Some of us would be pagans and Gaia worshippers and people that do concept albums about Greta Thunberg and things like this.
As long as they're diverting the glory and the energy away from the creator, then they're all on the bad side.
Yeah, that makes sense. Fair enough. So she carries on. She goes, you can carry out these things that you need to carry out for your occult purposes, but it's not just the occult, is it? It's military, it's the intelligence agencies, it's about money and power and the various institutions and corporations involved. And many of them are into the occult. And perhaps there are specific groups within Hollywood that are at the head of it, let's say. But I would say it's a bit more organic than that there's a multitude of different groups with different ideas and purposes that are all connected. And the note that I've wrote is, so neither of you know anything about this at all then? Also, I'm very sorry to everybody. Like, you know, we've tuned in and we're doing something about satanic music industry and stuff like that. And like, no one's explaining anything about the satanic music industry or the Illuminati. Like, this is what, at this point in the interview, I was like, this is shit. You're not going to explain anything. Like, there's nothing here that is new or revelatory. You're not even explaining the old tropes. But seeing as they're shit, we'll do it. So, because some people might have been listening going, like, I'm not quite sure what's underpinning this. And what is underpinning this is this concept that all the major institutions of entertainment, essentially Hollywood and the music industry, are under Illuminati control. Some would say satanic. That depends on your thought, but essentially, as you said before, Brent, it's going against the glory of God. So I suppose that could be deemed satanic, and that is the point of the Illuminati essentially as well. They sort of want to usurp God and see themselves as God, and so the concept is the music industry is used to promote theories, promote occult ideas surreptitiously, and also to literally cast spells on people. And this will either be in sort of like encouraging promiscuous behavior, encouraging pedophilia, subtly encouraging satanic practice, drug use, as you said earlier, the dumbing down of society and all of that. And all of this comes from essentially one origin point. And that origin point is a man who sometimes went by the name of Lance Collins, but is probably more well known as John Todd. Now, Now, John Todd, we both in the past have listened to a lot of his lectures, shall we say. He's we'll get into it, but he's the guy that came up with the idea that there's satanic influence on the music industry. And how did he know this? Well, he's only a bloody insider, isn't he? He's only got first-hand knowledge of it, not only of the music industry, but also of the satanic aspect of it. So, John Todd, born in 1949, also known as John Todd Collins or Lance Collins, later known as Chris Sarian Collins and Christopher Collins. And it's always refreshing when someone has a number of names. You can immediately, right? You can immediately think one of two things. Either this is a character in a turn-of-the-century Russian novel, or this is probably a fucking con man. So, bearing in mind as none of those names are even close to Rozhan Raskolnikov, I'm going to assume it might be the latter. John Todd was an American speaker and a conspiracy theorist. Like he claimed to be a former occultist who was born into a family, a generational family of witches, into essentially an Illuminati family.
The Collins family, yeah.
The Collins family, yeah. The witchy Collins family. Before later converting into Christianity. And he was a primary source. He was included in some Chick tracks. We've talked about Jack Chick and his sort of wacky Christian shit. He was against things like Dungeons and Dragons, Catholicism, neo-paganism, and Christian rock. So he probably would have been a big fan of Donovan, if we're brutally honest. But that's so. Todd turns up in the 70s and starts making a huge variety of claims about witches, Satanists, and the Illuminati. And essentially, his theory was that there was a massive plot conspiring against Christianity and against Christians. So he claimed that he'd been a witch whilst he was in the United States Navy, but converted to Christianity whilst visiting a Southern Californian Pentecostal church. But he'd actually done a few sort of speaking engagements in 1968 when he appeared to be preaching sort of Christian gospel, which doesn't really line up with his story, but we'll come back to that. So he'd been floating around with a woman called Linda, and saying that in 1968, saying that he was a former witch that had converted to Christianity. But he disappeared for a bit and then came back without his wife, saying that basically God had told him to go and seek other mates and that he needed to sort of essentially spread his seed. In 1969, he joined the United States Army, and he was stationed in Germany for a few months before being discharged for psychiatric reasons and drug use. So, you know, he's a bit of a troubled character, and it's already he's saying that he's dabbled in both Christianity and witchcraft, which apparently he learned in the Navy. And I've never been in the Navy, but I don't think that's like a sort of core curriculum activity. It's probably quite fringe. So in 1972, Todd became associated with this thing called the Jesus Movement Coffee House. It's essentially like, a sort of Christian evangelical center, preaching the gospel, trying to convert people to be born-again Christians. And in 1973, while it's sort of working with this group, he appeared on a local Christian television show in Phoenix, Arizona, and was invited by evangelist Doug Clark to appear on his Amazing Prophecy show on the Faith Broadcasting Network. And so he seemed to be doing quite well. And then in 1973, for reasons that were not clear at the time, he left. Now, about the same time, he also was living in San Antonio, and he claims to have been addicted to crystal meth, and he says, and see if you can spot the already flaw in his backstory, that in 1972, age 23, living in San Antonio and addicted to crystal meth, smoking $150 worth a day, he was wandering around in a complete stupor, and something drew him to a church where he met a man called Claude. And he confessed to him that he'd been involved in witchcraft, and that the devil had probably got a hold of his soul. And Claude took this seriously and read the Bible to him, a passage from Timothy. And immediately, John said that he felt all the evil leaving his body, and he became a born-again Christian on the spot. How long it took him to come down off the crystal meth is not entirely clear, but he converted immediately to Christianity, saying that he was afraid to leave witchcraft that he'd been in for generations, because essentially they don't fuck about, these witches. They will kill you, and he was concerned that they were going to kill him. But he also found that his newfound faith in Jesus gave him sort of a feeling of invincibility, and so he sort of cracked on. 6 weeks later, Jim Dolan, who's this reporter from the San Antonio News, was looking for a story, and he's found that this church, which Todd is speaking at all of a sudden, is doing sermons about how society is plagued by Satanism and witchcraft. And he spoke to John Todd at the time. John Todd was living in a secret hiding place that the church had organized, obviously to protect him from the witches. And Todd said that in occult circles, his name was Lance Collins, and he discovered witchcraft while serving in the army 6 years prior. And he was
what?
Yes, that's what he said.
Okay.
Well spotted. So he discovered witchcraft while serving in the army 6 years prior, and he'd risen to the rank of Grand.
Hold on. And he was 23 at that time. So 6 years prior, he was in the army. Yes,
where he learned witchcraft. Seems perfectly reasonable to me, Brent. Anywho, he'd risen to the rank of Grand Druid. And apparently at that time, he was actually in charge of 13 covens in the USA, 3 of which were in San Antonio. And I know what some people are thinking. Druids and witches are different things. They're not connected in any way. And so that doesn't make sense. Yeah, put a pin in that thought. Todd said that basically these covens, they sacrificed both animals and people. But he said that he'd left witchcraft because he'd grown to think that he'd been deceived about it, that essentially it wasn't offering him the power that it had promised. He felt that it was a bit of a con. So on Halloween that year, they at that church they had a sort of essentially like a burning of satanic articles, and he claimed to burn his Book of Shadows. Now, Book of Shadows is an occult diary, and it's sort of like it charts your progression as occultic person, apparently, and so you're writing all these things down. It's a bit like, you know, those purple binders that we got at school, like record of achievements. It's a bit like a record of achievement, only for witches, apparently. Now it turned out that this thing was a bit of a spectacle, right? Basically, because like Beatles and Rolling Stones albums were burnt too, but there was also just a lot of stuff that was burnt there that were just because it was burnable. They weren't actually burning anything particularly important. But John Todd had got a flavour for the dramatic, and so he decided to go on a speaking tour. And on this speaking tour of various churches, he claimed to have been involved in literal human sacrifices. And he said that he'd seen a politician, the South Dakota Senator George McGovern, murder a little girl in front of him with as part of a satanic ritual. He also claimed that he was the occult advisor to the Kennedy family, and that he was the personal warlock to John F. Kennedy, who he also claimed was still alive and hadn't been killed by Lee Harvey Oswald or the CIA or the mafia. He was in hiding, and they were all properly into witchcraft and shit. And he also said that witchcraft was satanic, and that a network of this satanic covens essentially ruled the world.
Boom.
Exactly. Now, and this obviously ties into this concept of the Illuminati, and this is what Garth and Coco are alluding to without fully explaining it. Now, in 1974, he was seen by Jack Chick. Jack Chick is the lunatic that does these Chick tracts, which are these tiny little comics. I've got about 200 of them upstairs, and they tell sort of moralistic tales, essentially about how anything other than ultra-conservatism is massively satanic, including the Catholic Church. Apparently that is satanic, according to Jack Chick. Anyway, they got together, and with the help of Todd, he wrote this comic called The Broken Cross, and it's based loosely on Todd's own experiences, and it's a surprisingly homoerotic piece about a town run by witches, including the government and the police, and a load of hitchhikers turn up and they get sacrificed to Satan. And it's based on Todd's true life, and there's a couple of heroes in it that for no reason at all are very often shirtless, these great big bristling muscly guys who are sort of Christian task force that are there to root out the evil, essentially. It's very weird. Anyway, also in 1974, whilst he's doing this, Todd moved to Dayton, Ohio with his new wife Sheila, where and stop me if you think that this might be opposed to his supposed Christian ideals at the time, but he opened up an occult bookstore and began recruiting for a Wiccan coven. So a year later, in 1975, he's working at this occult bookstore, which he calls the Witch's Cauldron. And he's doing this because at this point he claims that he was abandoned by Christianity. And he says that I put my life on the line. Now I told you all this incredible shit. and Christianity abandoned me. So I've gone back to the occult. And do you know what he meant by saying that Christianity had abandoned him?
They stopped booking his shows.
They stopped booking his shows. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was it. Like, and so there was no money in it anymore. So he decided to go back into the occult. He later explained this to his followers as a period of backsliding, he calls it, because the pull of the occult power is just obviously so very, very strong that, you know, even the best of us can sort of be tempted. So Jack Chick contacted him in 1975 and is horrified to hear that he's reverted back to the occult, and he tries to get him to come back to Christianity. But Todd decides to try a different tactic, and he asked Jack Chick, have you ever considered becoming a witch? At which Jack Chick said that no, he'd prefer to stay being a Christian, and they fell out for a long time. So later that year, Todd, who's now going by his occult name, Lance Collins, is interviewed by a chap called D.L. Stewart for a local newspaper. And he claimed to be a wizard. So remember, he's a grand druid, he's a witch, he's a wizard, he's a personal warlock to JFK. But now he's also the leader of about 5,000 witches in Dayton itself. And he was the Grand Magus, the Grand Magnus of a Wiccan coven, and essentially was responsible for all of this. And he said that basically that about 50% of witchcraft is all to do with sex. And that's why when he's recruiting for these covens and stuff like that, although it might seem weird, he's asking people who are joining these covens to do sort of sex things with him, you know, because that's how you get into Wiccan covens. He said that sacrifices, at this point, he decides to say that sacrifices aren't a real thing, that this is actually this is propaganda that's been put around by Christians, and that witchcraft is peaceful. And any connection to Satanism is also lies spread by Christians, missing the massive irony that he, not a year earlier, as a Christian, was spreading these exact things. This is why people know of him. Now, at the time, local police had accused him of like taking in runaway girls, teens off the streets, homeless people, kids from around the local area, and inviting them to have what they called drug-fueled sex orgies. Now, Todd claimed that he was being persecuted by the police. And as proof of this, he said that his store had been robbed at gunpoint numerous times, and the police had never done anything about it, and that later also his house had nearly been burned down. Now, the police obviously said, no one's robbing your shop. Why would anyone rob an occult bookstore? How much money do you think they would get? Why do you think they'd turn up with a gun? This sounds very stupid. And also pointed out that he probably burned his own house down. Anyway, Todd said that they were essentially like, these are small-minded people, that they don't understand that sex and the taking of certain substances is an important part of the rituals of Wicca, and that is how you initiate people into the coven. He wished that he could have done something different, but that's just the rules, and he doesn't make the rules, Brent. So he's just got to do it, like, even if he doesn't want to, and that means that he has to have drug-fueled sex with young girls. In 1976, he claims that he became a Wiccan minister. And if people are keeping track, he's been a Grand Magus, he's been the head of a coven, he's been a chief warlock, and he's also a high druid. And all of these things are apparently connected to witchcraft and Wicca, which the astute of you might point out are completely different things, but let's not get bogged down.
He is grinding.
He is grinding, isn't he? Now, the thing is, when he became this Wiccan minister in 1976, he actually approached some people who were genuinely into Wicca, a chap called Gavin Frost and a chap called Isaac Bonowitz. And very shortly after inducting him as a Wiccan minister, they revoked his association with the group and decided that he was a liar who'd made up all these stories about being persecuted. And they kicked him out of Wicca, suggesting that he hadn't actually got the first clue about anything to do with Wicca at all, despite the fact that he claimed to be a Grand Magnus, which they continually said is not a thing in Wicca. But anyway, at the time, Todd was then sentenced to 6 months in prison for the charge which was described as contributing to the unruliness of a minor. And his wife called Jack Chick and said all of a sudden that, you know what, we'd thought about it, and in retrospect, we suspect we'd probably like to be Christians again. Is there any way you can help John get out of prison? So, in 1977, he did a speaking event at the Faith Baptist Church in Canoga Park, and he explained that this is where he really sort of got into his stride. He explained that he's an ex-Illuminati member. So he's a druid, he's a Grand Magnus, he's a private warlock, he's a Wiccan minister, and now he's a member of the Illuminati. And he's telling all these people at the church, and he's warning them that this society of witches, which is run by the Illuminati, is endemic throughout society, in the police force, in all of the entertainment industry, in politics, in every echelon and sort of band of society. There's people who are into the occult, and these are either members of the Illuminati or witches and people who are subservient but ultimately serving the Illuminati. And at this point, he claimed that he'd been a witch since he was 5, from the witch family, the Collins family, which is a multi-generational family of witches. He also said that the pyramid on the dollar bill was the symbol of the Illuminati, and it was the proof that this Illuminati exists. Do you know who the first person to sort of mention that was? Where this concept of the eye on the pyramid is Illuminati?
No, I mean, I would have guessed it would have been someone like John Robeson or Abbe Barrowell, like the two people that wrote the first Illuminati books, but I don't know.
Apparently, it was William Guy Carr who did Pawns in the Game in the 50s. Like, he was the first to big, and that makes sense because actually the dollar on the bill, on the dollar bill, it was Henry Wallace that brought it in, and he was actually sort of like, he said it was Christian, but he was also sort of influenced by a mysterious Soviet mystic, Nicholas Roerich, who claimed to have the Stone of Destiny, or the Chintamani Stone, in his possession, which was a jewel that had been knocked off the crown of Lucifer during the fight between the angels, where the fallen angels were cast out of heaven. So, you know, big if true. Anyway, so William Guy Carr's Pawn in the Game, it came out in the 50s, said that this was the pyramid on the dollar bill was evidence of a Luciferian conspiracy by a hidden elite, which was the Illuminati and the international bankers, to establish a new world order and ultimately a totalitarian one world government. William Guy Carr, a prominent Canadian conspiracist, argued that the pyramid and the all-seeing eye on the US dollar bill were symbols of a secretive, ongoing Luciferian conspiracy by groups like the Illuminati and the Freemasons to establish a new world order. Carr said he didn't see the symbols as representing the official narrative of the founding of the United States. Instead, he claimed that they were evidence of a long-term trans-historical plot by atheistic, materialistic men and secret societies who were trying to achieve global domination. He said, the all-seeing eye atop the unfinished pyramid is not a Christian symbol of divine providence, but is an emblem used by secret societies to represent the omniscience and guiding hand of the conspirators themselves, or even Satan / Lucifer. Novus Ordo Seclorum, which officially translates to New Order of the Ages, referring to the New American Era, he says that Novus Ordo Seclorum means New World Order, and that's where that conspiracy theory started. Carr's writings, such as Pawns of the Game and Satan, Prince of this World, which is not a sequel to Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. It's a completely separate text. He alleged that these conspirators use wars, revolutions, and control over financial institutions to further their goal of abolishing all existing national governments and religions, ultimately imposing a totalitarian government. Now, apparently the pyramid's 13 steps represent the original 13 colonies, with the Roman numerals indicating the year 1776 as the date of the Declaration of Independence. But Carr says that that's bollocks, that basically 13 is a satanic number and everything else is just basically indications that Satan is real and that the Illuminati are in control of the entire world because it's on the currency of one country. Anywho, so John Todd, and this is where we're getting into it, he said that rock music was part of this demonic conspiracy, and that specifically rock music was used to spread Satanism and to cast spells. He said that he knew David Crosby of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and he said, so speaking of David Crosby, and I says, yo, David, because they're friends, I said, do they still take the master? And then what? So if people don't know, the master is like the original recording of an album. It's like the sort of the copy, and it used to be a really big deal because before computers, it was put on a great big reel to reel, and then from the master, all other copies of the album are then mass produced and sent away. So you keep the masters in case you wish to sort of rejigger it, remix it, re-release it later, and stuff like that. So John Todd said to David Crosby, do they still take the master to the temple room? And Dave said, yeah. And I said, do they still get the coven to conjure demons into the master? And he said, of course. And I said, I've got to know something. What's the main reason for rock music? And David Crosby said, oh, come on, Lance. You know what it's for. It's for the same as when you were in. It's so we can play spells on people that we couldn't cast spells on. So that's David Crosby of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, expressing in a completely natural way, in a way that all people have conversations, that, yeah, they conjure demons. They get a coven of witches in to the temple room of the record company, and they conjure demons into the master, and that is then spread out as a spell to cast this on everyone that listens to the records. And it's very good of David Crosby to explain this to John Todd whilst acknowledging that he is no longer involved in the Illuminati, by saying, well, it's the same as when you were in, you know. I mean, it is strange that he would explain it if he's just acknowledged that, well, you were in it, you know what it's for. But anyway, John Todd said this. John Todd goes on to say, I said one last thing. I've heard that you have to be an initiated witch now to get a record contract. And David Crosby said, yeah, that's right. Many of us who were not total witches have to be witches now. That's a pain in the arse, isn't it? Like, it's ever more complicated to get a record deal. Like, do you think Spotify and SoundCloud and the fact that artists can put out their own music, do you think that's really put a downer on the satanic music? It's, bollocks, how can we curse all this? Like, we can't, like, and they're not even witches, not even total witches, some of them. Anyway, John Todd explains this, because I know, like, some of you are sitting there thinking this sounds made up. Well, no. John's got right. John's got details. Okay, so you doubting Thomases out there. He says this about the mastering of albums. He says on the full moon, it's taken to a temple room about the size of this auditorium, because this is taken from recordings of his speeches on this tour of churches. It's taken to a temple room about the size of this auditorium that is in every one of the major music companies. Behind locked doors is these in the executive offices, and placed on an altar in the north of the room with a pentagram engraved in the floor. And then 13 hand-chosen witches and wizards of the coven come in and conjure a principality or a power-up. usually a region or something like that. And they order him and the demons under him to follow every record and every tape coming off of that master. And so he says that all records have demons attached to them. He then goes on to say that he knows this because, again, he's been in the music industry. He says, and I quote, Elton John has said he has never written a song or sung a song that's not written in witch language. So apparently, Hold Me Closer, Tiny Dancer is some sort of hideous occultic spell to, pervert the minds of the young or anyone that listens to that record. I could point out at this point that, Elton John didn't write his lyrics. It's Bernie Taupin that writes his lyrics.
Like everybody knows that.
Yeah, quite. So he also made claims about rock music. He says they produce rock and roll music to put demonic influence in your life. Music is a spell, and every witch knows it. And so this is what they're talking about, the ritualistic aspect of the music industry. This is what Coco and Garth are talking about. They've not bothered to explain it because it's just an assumption that if you're watching Ickonic, you probably know all this, or at least have a working knowledge of the fact that the music industry is satanic and the Illuminati use it for various reasons, one of which is to literally cast spells on people because they're all into the occult and they've got their astrologers. Todd asserted that the Illuminati did not produce music for money, as they owned everything anyway, but rather as a means to cast spells and bring demonic influence into people's lives. He described the evils and addiction of rock music, stating its purpose was to encourage Christians to cast spells on themselves. Like unknowingly, they'll listen to the rock music and then the demons get inside of them. And that's a tricky situation. He said that rock music is essentially thousands of years old, and it's essential to witchcraft. Witches allegedly can't function without it. So they're a bit like Otto from The Simpsons. It's claimed to be a spell, and musicians allegedly get their music from spirit guides. Like they think they're writing it themselves, but they're either possessed or through the use of drugs. Spirit guides get in and write the music for these artists. And then witches and occultists cast spells on the albums and order demons into the copies of this music, which makes it addictive and essentially possesses the listeners. And so it goes on and on and on and on and on. Now, some of you might have picked up on the concept that he says that rock music is essentially thousands of years old.
Yeah.
It's not, is it? It can't be. It just can't be. But I mean, mostly because fundamentally it requires electric guitars. But anyway. He also said that Star Wars, which was popular at the time, was an expression of witchcraft and another way that again, these occultic messages get pushed to the youth in seemingly innocuous sources. He says that the Force is essentially magic, and the concept of Star Wars is to secretly turn people on to witchcraft. He also said that Sharon Tate was killed by Charles Manson because she wanted to leave witchcraft, and that and so she was sacrificed. And this actually comes from a myth that she was inducted into into witchcraft on the set of The Eye of the Devil by, his name escapes me. Sanders is his second name. No relation. The witch.
I was going to say what, Neil?
No, it wasn't me. What's his fucking name? He was all into sex magic and stuff like that. Let me just check.
Bernie? No,
it wasn't Bernie Sanders. It was not Maxine. Alex Sanders, the King of the Witches.
What a good name.
Yeah. Anyway, like he totally wasn't doing it just so that he could see naked women, and like, you know, he was well into it and that. Like he's I've seen his ceremonial robes. They're at the Witchcraft Museum in Cornwall. Anyway, the myth was that Alexander's inducted Sharon Tate into witchcraft on the set of The Eye of the Devil, but it turns out that none of that's true, and it's all bollocks. But anyway, he also has an opinion about epilepsy. John Todd was strongly of the opinion and advocated the theory that epileptic fits were simply demons, and that epilepsy could be cured and removed from a person with prayer.
Somebody get this guy a job with RFK Jr.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not that fucking far off of it, isn't it? But yeah, you know, our advice is that no, that's probably not what's causing epilepsy. He also claimed to be friends with Charles Manson, and he later claimed that that Charles Manson at some point would be released from prison, and his job was to head up a violent Illuminati army that would attack and kill civilians as part of the Satanic takeover. Yeah.
That happened. What are you on about?
Well, it's true. You know, he did get that one right. So, you know, 1 point to John Todd. So in 1978, Todd toured several cities of the United States doing lectures on the Illuminati. He now expanded to say that rock music was designed to cause children to be disobedient, and he encouraged people to set fire to records, basically. And he recorded all these talks, and this is where we're getting all these quotes from. These later became known as the John Todd tapes, and you can still get these online. There's hours and hours of them, and you know, there are varying sort of levels of interest. We're giving you the highlights here, essentially. He said that basically the Illuminati had a plan that was in place for thousands of years, and they were slowly coming to fruition. And he predicted in 1978 that the Illuminati's plan to take over the world would be in its final throes in December of 1980, when the Illuminati would break down the supply chain, starve people, and this would start riots. And so he decided that what he would now start encouraging people that were listening to him to do would be to stockpile weapons for the inevitable battle where you would have to be prepared to kill your neighbors in order to protect yourselves, because essentially the Illuminati were going to kill all the Christians. Yeah. He also claimed that Ayn Rand's 1957 novel Atlas Shrugged was the blueprint of the Illuminati for unleashing a planned satanic takeover, which is, you know, that's a clever place to hide it in Ayn Rand, in Atlas Shrugged, because next to no fuckers reading it. So the people might claim to have read it, but it's shit. Anyway,
I only watched the TV special. I couldn't be bothered to read it either.
There we go. Like, he also claimed that he was involved, and whether this is true or not, who can say? But Todd claimed that he was involved in the creation of Christian rock. You know, bands like Stryper and shit like that, and
System of a Down.
System of a Down, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. He was the guy that came up with that idea. He said that it was a good way to keep people involved in rock music, which you remember is a way to get them sort of full of demons and shit, because Christians were rejecting it, mostly because, you know, people like him had told them to. Anyway, but he, as an alleged former high-ranking member of the Illuminati, personally gave $8 million to this prominent evangelical pastor named Chuck Smith of the Cavalry Chapel to establish the Christian rock industry. And he said that this was done deliberately to entrap Christian young people in rock music and its demonic beat. He also claimed that well-known Christian figures such as Jim Baker, Jerry Falwell, Billy Graham, Bob Jones Sr., Oral Roberts, and Pat Robertson were also members of the Illuminati. and he claimed that Falwell had been bribed by the Illuminati with $50 million. He also claimed that US President Jimmy Carter was the Antichrist, which we know is not true because it's Greta Thunberg. Now, some pastors at this point, basically, some of the people that he's visiting these churches are starting to notice, shall we say, inconsistencies in his backstory, and suggested that he might be lying about all of this. But that didn't stop Jack Chick. And in 1978, the comic book Spellbound comes out, which features Todd as a character under his claimed witch name, Lance Collins. And in this, Spellbound claims that the entire rock music industry is controlled by witches who cast spells on the master tapes to cause evil spirits to follow all the recordings thus produced, which results in kids becoming demon-possessed from listening to rock and roll. In 1978, tapes of him instructing a class on how to practice magic spells in 1976 were suddenly discovered by the Faith Baptist Church. The Faith Baptist Church, you must remember, is one of these that has been promoting him and has been listening to his story. And they're going, hang on, how come in 1976 you're doing this stuff, teaching a class at the Witch's Cauldron, which was his occult bookstore, on how to cast spells and how to become a witch? Now, he was confronted with this tape and he didn't really have an answer as such. And so he decided to just sort of quietly leave the room. And the silence and embarrassment was only shattered by the awkwardness of a loaded gun falling out of his pocket onto the floor, because apparently this was his like. John Todd was known to carry loaded guns around, which seems strange.
Wasn't this recording like found because it was on the side B of one of these tapes or something like that?
Something like that, yeah. One of the things that he'd recorded, he'd used an old tape or something like this.
Yeah.
And so he'd been recording these lectures that he'd done at the Witch's Cauldron. And then he'd later recorded the John Todd tapes. And the people had found this out, which was quite the shock to them. So the following year, he'd been being investigated by a couple of Christian magazines. One was called Christianity Today, and one was called the Cornerstone magazine. And they published more and more revelations. They discovered that Todd, despite claiming to be a witch since the age of 5, had only first discovered what the Illuminati was in 1973, when he was still an active Christian pastor, although he'd claimed, if you remember, that in 1972 he was on crystal meth. None of it adds up. None of it adds up, because he seemingly was basically living a double life and being both interested in sort of Wicca and witchcraft in a way, and also professing to be a Christian preacher. So in 1973, he sent his wife to a library, and she came back. This is his second wife, and she came back with a series of books. And these books are most likely Pawns in the Game by William Guy Carr, None Dare Call It Conspiracy, Proofs of a Conspiracy, and the works of Nestor Webster. And so, ironically, this is the strange thing, because those are the things, as Brent's pointed out loads of times, those are the texts that have inspired Alex Jones, David Icke, Jordan Maxwell, all of the prominent sort of conspiracy theorists of any sort of note. And they also sponsored influenced John Todd, who stole his ideas from them. And then John Todd also influenced all these people through the music aspect of it.
And Robert Welch from John Birch Society.
Yes, Robert Welch, and Cleon Skousen and people like that. W. Cleon Skousen.
Yep.
Who was it that did None Dare Call It Conspiracy? His name's just escaped from my mind.
Gary Allen.
Gary Allen, yes, and he was, of course, John Birch Society, and John Birch Society were also sort of like, you know, fundamental in promoting the idea of JFK assassination being a communist plot and such like that. So anyway, he said that the structure of the Illuminati includes a Grand Druid Council, which is the Council of 13. And within the United States, the Illuminati is allegedly called the Council of Foreign Relations. The Trilateral Council is described as the brain center of the CFR and the American version of the European Common Market. He said that David Rockefeller is identified as the head of both the CFR and the Trilateral Council and the second most powerful man in the Illuminati. And so when a lot of people were listening to John Todd and going, wow, what he said matches up with what other people who claim to know about the Illuminati have said, that means that he must be genuine. No, he was stealing these ideas from Non-Dare Call It Conspiracy, from Proofs of a Conspiracy, from Nestor Webster, from Guy Pawns in the Game. That's where he was getting it from. He said that the Illuminati is a powerful pagan government funded by the Rothschilds family. He claims that the Rothschilds are not considered human by the occult world, but rather gods, believed to be sons and daughters of Lucifer. The Illuminati is depicted as a global conspiracy aiming for world domination, with the Rothschilds at the top giving orders to their priesthoods, including people in political power, who then implement their plans. The speaker alleges that the Illuminati controls finance, businesses, and even orchestrates events like wars for their own purposes, which is a blood sacrifice. So John Todd is repeating all these things from these previous Illuminati things. It then becomes a truism. John Todd also spoke about the Rothschilds funding both sides of wars whilst owning both countries involved. He says that their use of symbols, their belief that Lucifer is the god of life and good, while Jesus is the god of darkness and evil, and their strategy of bankrupting their own business to gain control of the world is the proof that they exist. He also said that UFOs are demonic spirits in physical form. Now, do you know one of the things that he was actually really negative about? Surprisingly, he said that he said he didn't like this particular organization because he said that they received money directly from the Illuminati. The John Birch Society.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. Yeah. He didn't like it, despite the fact that he clearly sort of like repeated a lot of their propaganda. He said that the John Birch Society had taken money from the Illuminati. He also said that Mormonism is an occult practice, and that is something that again is repeated, like that Mormonism is essentially Freemasonry disguised as a sort of religion, and that the certain of their tenets and rituals are exactly the same. I don't think that's true. He also claimed to have been a Green Beret in the Vietnam War. Yeah. You've also remembered that he claimed to have both been in the army and the navy, and that he learned witchcraft in both of these things, despite the fact that he was actually from a family of witches and was born into witchcraft and was a witch aged 5. So again, at best we can say that his story is inconsistent. He definitely was not a Green Beret in Vietnam. He was a typist. And he had no record of being in Vietnam. In fact, he was actually sort of kicked out quite quickly due to emotional instability with pseudological fantastica. Pseudological fantastica is compulsive lying and an inability to tell reality from fantasy. Yeah. He also was kicked out for making threats of murder, false suicide reports, and because he was described as having, I quote, a severe personality disturbance. He also claimed to have murdered an officer whilst he was in the army in Germany, but to have escaped prison with the help of the Illuminati. But this, again, he must have done this in a really sharp turnaround, because he was kicked out very, very quickly. So these were discovered by those magazines, Christianity Today and Cornerstone, and they published this. They also started to publish certain other things. Now, there's an excellent, if you want to know this in far more detail, there's an excellent podcast on this called The Conspiracy Files, where people should really listen to that. It really fleshes this out. It's like several hours just talking about John Todd. They notice from listening back to his lectures, aside from all the contradictions and all the made up shit, he also doesn't know how to pronounce certain things. He pronounces Stonehenge as Stonehenge. He pronounces Samhain as Samhain. And he speaks about the Necronomicon as if it's a real book. It's not. It's an invention of H.P. Lovecraft. It's like a grimoire, like a magical text, but it's completely invented by H.P. Lovecraft. He also pronounces coven as coven, which was of particular amusement to me and will be of amusement to anybody that has seen the fantastic documentary American movie. There's a bit in it. This guy's making a horror film, and one of the lead actors loses his shit with him. It's like, basically, why do you keep calling it coven? So why shouldn't you pronounce it? Why aren't we calling it coven? Well, we should call it coven, as it's pronounced. And the director looks at him and genuinely says, coven, that sounds like oven. That's stupid. I love that film. Anyway, so you remember that John Todd left Faith Broadcasting Network in 1973, and shortly afterwards he did a little bit of time, but it was never quite clear what had happened. Well, it was revealed by Christianity Today that in 1973 there had been allegations that he'd been making sexual advances towards the teenage girls that were involved in the church that he was working for. Also, that for some reason he was trying to incorporate witchcraft teachings into his Bible studies class, and also that he was known to carry a loaded 38 caliber handgun into the church. Also, that he was using drugs at a massive rate. Also, his marriage had ended because he'd accidentally impregnated his wife's teenage sister. So for all of these reasons, in 1973, he was dismissed from the Coffee House ministry and he was denounced on that particular television show. So, but this didn't stop people. And this is all coming out in 1978, right? Okay, so people know that he's a fraud. People have figured out that something's not adding up at this point. But that didn't stop a man called Jacob Saylor, who in 1988 published a comic book, The Illuminati and Witchcraft, which was based on John Todd, and it was based on his story. Now, his story also became the basis for a different book, a fantasy book called Witchcraft and the Illuminati, which was published in 1981 by The Covenant, the Sword, and the Arm of the Lord, who you might remember is one of those terrorist organizations that we speak about in the Turner Diaries episode. It's a Christian identity group, like, you know, white nationalists, terror organization. They published this in 1981, and then in 1999 the Christian Patriot Association reprinted the book, which repeated many of Todd's claims, including this power structure of the Illuminati, the idea that Atlas Shrugged was the Illuminati's secret blueprint. But it also added certain things about how Jews and African Americans were also pawns of the Illuminati, as is the want of the Christian identity terror group, the Covenant, the Sword, and the Arm of the Lord. So anyway, at this point, it's a bit strange because Todd goes missing, and it's not widely known that he's been sort of debunked by Christianity Today and exposed to, at the very least, have been a very shifty character. Like, he's lied about certain things, and his behavior is certainly not Christian. Now, at this point, the internet's going all over the place, and message boards and the conspiracy culture is getting a new wave. And so his tapes grew in popularity. I remember being able to, like, you know, you used to be able to buy CDs of the John Todd tapes and stuff like that. But he's nowhere to be found, and people speculated that the Illuminati must have killed him. And that sort of gave a bit more credibility to his story. And in 1991, he'd recorded a long speech whilst in prison, claiming that he was innocent and had been framed by the Illuminati. And this was released by Fritz Springmeier, and it was transcribed in the book, The Bloodlines of the Illuminati, which is like a foundational conspiracy theory text. It tells you the 13 families that essentially rule the world and gives the sort of the idea for the Illuminati structure. And it is David Icke cited it, Alex Jones has cited it. It became one of those things where it was just considered to be true. Fritz Springmeier later spent some time in prison for an armed robbery.
Yep. he seems to have the same defense that John Todd had.
Yeah, that he was being set up by the Illuminati, basically. So in these tapes, John Todd claimed that he was imprisoned because he wouldn't turn over information that would have led to the arrest and probable murder of Christian groups by the Illuminati, like underground Christian groups that were fighting against the Illuminati. Apparently, they were going to be killed by them, but John Todd refused to snitch on them. And so he was basically given a 30-year sentence in prison. And he said that he didn't commit any of the crimes he was accused of, and anyone that says that he did any of these things were Illuminati collaborators in the Christian church that were working to discredit him. And he said that basically all this stuff that had been said about him lying about his military record was also just to discredit him, that he was in a special group called Phoenix, but his records were so secret that the CIA was the only person with access to it, and so it was easy to frame him. And he urged everyone to start making copies of his tapes and making copies of this audio message to get the word out. Later, Fritz Springmeier, before he did his own stint in prison, said that he'd lost contact with John Todd and that John Todd had probably died in prison. And for a long time, that was the theory, and that kind of bolstered it, didn't it? So it gave sort of credibility, a certain sort of dark credibility to the story. But he hadn't died in prison. What had happened was that in 1987, John Todd was arrested for the rape of a University of South Carolina student, and then was further charged with molesting girls aged 13 and 14 who were students of the karate school where he worked. He was then accused of 70 other incidents of sexual abuse. He basically pretended that he was a book publisher, and pretend that he had a secretarial job for certain women. He would invite them for interviews for this job, and then when he got them in like a secluded space, he'd heavily try it on with them. Some have suggested to the point of actual physical sexual assault. So remember when he was sentenced to 6 months in prison for contributing to the unruliness of a minor? And remember he was at the time trying to start what he described as a Wiccan coven. And he was doing, some of the crazy police were accusing him of like doing all sorts of weird shit and blah, blah, blah. Well, it turns out that basically what he was doing was inviting underage girls from the local school, and sometimes runaways and homeless girls, and trying to induct them into the witch's coven. And as we mentioned earlier, witchcraft is 50% sex. And so, unfortunately, John Todd was in a position where he was basically forcing young girls to have oral sex with him, and telling them that it was part of a magical ceremony. And he did this to countless young girls. One 16-year-old told the police what was going on, and that was why he was arrested. But the suggestion was that he'd done it to numerous other girls, some younger than the girl that actually went to the police. He also had a rule that all witchcraft initiation rites were carried out in the nude. And so yeah, he's basically doing sort of casting couch stuff with grown women and then with children, and initiating sexual assaults to the point of rape on children. So he's sentenced to 30 years in prison, but he was released in 2004 to the Behavioral Disorder Treatment Unit run by the South Carolina Department of Mental Health because he was was ill, and he was, you know, he didn't get let off. He died there in 2007, and he's buried in Florence National Cemetery in Florence, South Carolina, under yet another name, Christian Siren Collins. And it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy, because there's an entire element of the conspiracy world that is based essentially solely on either John Todd's tapes or other people repeating what Todd has said, or taking what John Todd has said to be factual and then going on to say it. I remember there was these two, like, and this has gone throughout all aspects of the conspiracy theories. There's these two guys called the Pills. These two, they were sort of connected to what was it? There was these guys in New York. They were sort of like African guys that were sort of black power guys. Some of it leaning into sort of black nationalism, and they were sort of quasi conspiratorial. And there's these two, but they were sort of also into hip hop. They were sort of kind of like 5% type people and shit like that. And there was these two guys called the Pills, and they were well respected within sort of like, you know, that sort of culture. I remember watching an interview with them where they said that that Rick Rubin did that Rick Rubin satanically prayed over the masters of the records that he did, and that's why Run DMC was called Raising Hell, and that's why he was contributing to the darkness of hip hop. And they've clearly got that from John Todd, like, and as I say, it transpires that John Todd was a fraud. He at times dallied as a real sort of Christian minister, but like, here's the other thing, right? Okay, he knew nothing of witchcraft, he knew nothing of Wicca, he knew nothing of Satanism, he knew nothing of the Illuminati. The only thing that he did was he made up stories about being friends with David Crosby, and he pinched some ideas from certain books about the Illuminati that were widely available at the time and just repeated them. And all of the shit that he did where he was setting up these Wiccan covens and stuff, it was just made up. He's just making up as he goes along. Like, yeah, you've got to give me a blowjob in the nude and take these drugs. That's how we initiate you into the coven. Like, he's a scammer. He's an absolute scammer and a disgusting person. And yet he is still considered by many people to be a foundational underpinning of the Illuminati, specifically when it comes to the Illuminati in the music industry. And despite the fact that they haven't actually mentioned that, that is what this entire interview between Garth and Coco is really about. The assumed, the supposition that is a thing. We all know about this. We all know about the Illuminati, and it's just a thing. And this is where we're supposedly hearing about Coco's insight as an insider.